Okay, so this is a super fun one. As always, we have received this lovely design file and we're supposed to make it move, right? So now since this structure is a bunch of objects basically just balancing on top of one another, I'm kind of seeing that some of them, grow and spin and do these kind of movements. And obviously, if one of the objects at the bottom would move, then the objects on top of that would kind of react to that, right? So we want to create some nice dynamic movements and not make it feel so rigid. And like the previous lesson, we have to be a bit clever here in how we place our objects in a hierarchy to make the animation simple. That's kind of the key lesson in these ones. Like the animation isn't that fancy, but the way we structure things kind of make our animation a lot easier, and you can have a lot more freedom in terms of how you keyframe things. We're also going to animate certain parameters in sync with each other, so they follow each other's movements and react with one another, but then we can offset them so it doesn't feel so rigid and stiff. So yeah, let's jump right in. So yeah, as always, you're free to customize this. Most of the objects here you can customize after the animation is done, but in regards to the middle piece here, which is a torus, since we are going to animate, at least in my case, some attributes here in terms of the radius and stuff, we kind of need to decide on which model we'd like to use, or if you have another model that you would like to use and drop in here. But I'm basically going to animate the radius of the torus. And if you're going to switch to a cylinder or a tube, you kind of need to decide on that before we animate, because you can't translate some of these parameters between these objects. But yeah, I'm going to stick with the torus. And as far as the top level, you can come in here to the color selector and you can swap out to a cone shape instead. I'm going to stick with a sphere. And as for the roller, you can also swap between a few different items here. Also customize the colors, of course. I'm going to stick with a cylinder shape in my case, I think. And for the bottom level, you can also switch between a few different objects here. So basically the process that we're going to take is just to animate each object chronologically from bottom to the top within the same range. So let's say like 20 frames. And then once we have the entire structure animated, then we can offset these items and like play around with the timings and stuff. So it will be a fairly structured workflow, which is great in these types of cases, because when you're placing these many nulls and stuff, it can be a bit confusing. But yeah, we'll take one step at a time, do things slow. So since we are starting from the bottom up, the first thing that I'd like to do is probably animate this bottom level here. So as always, I like not to animate parameters on the actual object in case we aren't doing like, changes to the radius and stuff. If we're only doing like position and rotation, I don't like to animate the coordinates of the actual object. I like to place it within a null if I'm doing that. So that's what I'm going to do now. So I'll just hit Alt-G and group this bottom level. We will call this bottom. And this will be the null that I'll be animating. And then if you were to, for example, throw in another object, you can just place it within the null and you can easily swap things out without having to translate animation tracks and so on. So that's why I'm doing this. So yeah, we can go ahead and place our first keyframe. So I kind of want it to spin like this. I'll go ahead and place a keyframe here for rotation H at frame 0. And we'll go all the way to frame 20. And I'll do a 180 move here, so I'll just type in 180, hit the keyframe button, and I'll pull it into the timeline just so we have it stored here. I'll change to the F-curve mode. I'll hit Control A and S, make sure that I have my track selected, just like that, perfect. So we're not going to touch the tangents until most of our animations are done, because we kind of want things to move in sync with one another, and if you start to adjust the timings of these tangents individually, certain objects might get out of sync, so we kind of want to just place keyframes and not touch the tangents until we have most of it done, and then we'll kind of tweak the timings. So with that placed, we can just preview this just to see how it looks. Lovely, right? So I'm also kind of seeing as this spins, this flower shape reacts and kind of extends upwards, and also while it's doing that, it's kind of shrinking, so we have this kind of squash and stretch effect. So I'll hop into my flower null here, I'll fold out this cloner, and in the extrude object, that's where we'll find our offset parameter, where we can animate the offset. So at frame 0, I'll hit the first keyframe, and then at frame 20, I'll extend it to 65 centimeters in my case. Lovely, just like that. And I'll also go ahead and animate the dimensions of this rectangle, so we kind of like, as it gets pushed up, we're kind of squashing it in like that. So I'll hop back to frame 0. I'll keyframe both our width and our height. And then I go to frame 20. And we'll kind of just scale it down just a tad. So somewhere around there, I think feels good. Like that. And then make sure that we hit the keyframe button just so we store these values, just like that. Then we can watch it. And as you can tell, since we are animating the width and height, we're kind of losing the rounding that we had on our radius here in this parameter. And that is because this radius is kind of dependent on these values. And if we don't store the value on the larger number, it will not really go back once it's reached the smaller dimensions here. So I think we had it at like 12. Yeah. So I'll just store the 12 there. And then it will kind of just follow the width and height beyond that. But it will always be stored back to 12 and a half when it's larger. So that should be working for us. So I think this looks really nice. So I think it also would be cool if we spin this as it kind of extends up. So let's have it spin the opposite direction of the bottom pipe here. So we'll take a look at what coordinate that would be. So we'll rotate this. Yeah, so it's the rotation B here. Can probably set that back to 0. Yeah, like that. And then we can just go ahead and hit a keyframe, and at frame 0, we'll rotate it to, yeah, minus 180 like that. Perfect. Yeah, great. Good stuff. Now, as you can tell, we obviously don't want this intersection with the torus and the flower. We want the torus and everything above it to move with this like extension upwards. To do that, we'll need to kind of group these three things together and then animate the position upwards in sync with the flower expanding upwards. So I'll just hit Alt-G to create a null at the same position as this middle section here. And I'll drop both the top level and the top roller within this null, and I'll call it flower expand position. So we know that all of the position animation in this null will be to move with the flower expanding upwards. So to do that, we'll make sure that we are going to animate the position Y, which is the case for me. So I'll just go ahead and hit the keyframe button here on position Y. We'll move ahead 20 frames. And I know that we extended the extrude from, I believe it was 20 to 65. So that's 45 centimeters. So instead of like eyeing things, we can just go in here and just type plus 45, and now we have an exact amount for this movement. So that's great. So we'll hit keyframe here on position Y, just like that. Now we can watch it. And it follows it perfectly. Great. Now, to make things even more complicated, I would love if this torus kind of shrank as it moved up as well. Almost as if it's getting like squashed in between these two levels. So I'll go into my torus here, and this is what I meant by deciding on which shape to use. So I'll go back to frame 0, Shift F, and I'll keyframe my ring radius and my pipe radius, which are these parameters. So I'll go to frame 20 again, and I'll shrink this down to maybe like 13.5, and this one to somewhere around like there maybe. Let's look at that. Let's see what that does in terms of a difference. Maybe even smaller, just like that. Actually, let's put it at 12.5. Now, we obviously have this gap now between our flower and our top level, so we need to kind of solve this. And you could say, well, why don't we just move this flower expand position less upwards and like have it move a bit less? But in case we would like to offset the animation between the flower and the torus movement here, you're going to end up in a lot of trouble where this doesn't really hang on to the flower expand. Like you're basically going to have some colliding interest in terms of which way your objects should go. So the easier way to solve this would be to counter move this torus with this shrinking motion. So the way we can do that is, again, group our middle torus here. We'll call this level 1 plus 2 plus 3 pos for position. So level 1, 2, 3 is what I mean by this is level 1, this is level 2, and this is level 3. So with that being said, I want these two objects to follow with this position. So when we are moving this, these things follow just so they don't get left behind, because we don't want this thing to move in individually. We want these objects to follow the movement upwards with this torus. So that's why I want to make sure that these are within the same hierarchy. To do this counter movement, we'll just hop into the level 1 + 2 + 3 coordinates here. We'll go back to frame 0. We'll check that it's the position Y. It's actually not. It's the position Z, I believe. So we'll hit the keyframe button here on position Z, go to frame 20, and we'll move it down. And this time we kind of have to eye things. So I'll go to our front view. We'll move it down just a bit like that. Maybe at 8.5. Beautiful. And then we can watch this movement again. So now we have these two separate movements. So this is moving the entire section up just to kind of follow the movement of the flower expanding upwards. And then we have this null just to counteract the movement of the torus shrinking. So that is working perfectly. Now we also want to close this gap between these two levels as well, obviously. So to do that, we'll go ahead and group our top level null here. So I'll just hit Alt-G, and we'll obviously want to throw our roller in there as well. And we'll call this level 1 + 2. And we'll go back to frame 0 to set our first keyframe. I'll hit the diamond icon, and at frame 20, we'll move this top levels down so it's just touching the torus right there. Hit a keyframe again, and now we can watch it and see that everything is following each other's movements. Great. Now I kind of also want this middle section here to do like a bit of a spin or something, just to kind of show that it's moving individually but in sync with everything else. So if I rotate, let's see, rotation B here, we can just do like a 180 spin here. So since the flower moves in the clockwise direction, we can move this in the counterclockwise direction. So we'll do this. So let's do frame 0 degrees, and then at frame 20 we'll do minus 180 degrees, just like that. And let's take a look at how this is feeling. Cool. Now obviously this is very rigid at this point, so I'm kind of seeing that these objects move fairly in the same way, and then this top section will have this kind of tilting motion and then spin the ball around and stuff. So that requires some more keyframes so we can focus on them individually, because now we have all of these movements that needs to be in sync with one another. And then level 1 and 2 here, they can kind of have their own kind of set of movements. So with that being said, we can just come to the scene null here. We'll hit select children, so that selects everything within our scene, and then we can just drag everything into our timeline, and then everything that's animated comes in here. If everything in your entire scene comes in here, then you can just go into filter and just make sure that you select animated only. Otherwise, everything within your entire scene will end up here, and that's not what we want. We only want animated objects in there, so I'll go ahead and select that again. So certain objects should move in sync with one another. So we need to make sure that the tangents are having the same values. So the easiest way to do that is just to change the tangents on all of them together. So I'll just select all of the objects here, hit Ctrl-A-S to frame them up. So now we have them all selected, and then we can just pull these a bit just so we get some more fun dynamic movements here. So I'll extend this one quite a bit, and then maybe push this one. We really definitely want to make sure that the numbers here are the same, so we don't want any mixed results. So I'll just tweak these by the numbers instead. So something like that, and then these ones maybe like minus 18 perhaps. Then we can go ahead and watch it. And now things look a lot more fun, I think. And we are not even done, so things will look even better. So before we go ahead and offset all of these sections, we can go ahead and animate this level 1 and 2 here. I'm kind of seeing the top level do like a bit of a tilt and then spin around like this, and the ball does the same, and then it's as if the top level is really trying to stay in balance while everything else beneath it starts to move. So that's the kind of illusion that I want to create. So we can actually animate the rotation values on this level 1 and 2 null here, because we have everything else that we need within it. So as I said, we kind of wanted this tilt, and if I tilt it like that and then animate this attribute or this attribute, we're not really getting this kind of spinning motion that we wanted. So we need to manipulate these coordinates a bit. So I'll just zero that one out. And if I go ahead and spin this one, I'm getting some different rotational values here. So I want the 90, 90, and minus 90 values. So with that said, I'll set this to 90. And now if I tilt it on the rotation B here and then use the rotation P to spin it, I'm getting the right result for the purpose of this animation. So I'll set that back to minus 90 and 90. So the first thing that I'll do is keyframe this rotation B value. I kind of want it to tilt to maybe frame 17. I want this sequence to be a bit longer than the rest, so maybe something like that. So minus 105, I'll hit the keyframe button, and then I'll probably want it to tilt back once the full spin has happened. So I'll set that at frame 35, minus 90 again, and then we'll go ahead and do the spin. So that would be this axis, so the rotation P. So at frame 0, I'll move ahead to frame 35. I'll do a 540 degree spin, so a turn and a half. So that would be 90 minus 540, so minus 450. I'll hit keyframe on that. So we're doing like a turn and a half. Boom, boom, boom. Great. And since these keyframes doesn't really need to be in sync of anything, we can go ahead and manipulate them on their own. So for the rotation P, I'll want some more easing in and easing out. So something like that, perhaps. Yeah, great. And then obviously I want this roller object here to react with this top level spinning, right? So the first thing that I can animate is it's kind of like rolling outwards towards the edge as this thing starts to tilt. So I'll set a keyframe here at frame 0 on position X. I kind of want it to roll outwards to somewhere around like frame 26, and then it will kind of like slowly move back in. So that motion will kind of be the last one in this section. So I'll set this to maybe 50 centimeters, just like that. So it will kind of, let's actually do minus 50, so it won't roll the wrong way. So just like that, so way, and then it will roll back in. So at frame, let's say maybe 53, it will roll back in, so 0 centimeters, just like that. Way, boom. Let's tweak the tangents on the rotation X here. So we kind of want it to snap back as soon as it's reached this farthest position, and it will have some really long and nice easing in terms of these motions. Maybe let's try and tweak these a bit. Yeah, that felt a lot better. Maybe put this one a bit earlier. Yeah, nice. That looks a lot better. Woo-wee. Now we obviously want this to spin as it's rolling around too, right? So let's go ahead and do that. So we can go ahead and animate the rotation B, I believe in my case. So I'll set a keyframe here for frame 0. We'll check which way this should be rotating. So this way, right? So in the negative direction. So we'll go to frame 53, I believe, right? And we'll do a full negative spin. And as you can tell, when I moved it on frame 53, it looked as if it was rolling backwards, and I'll show you why. So we'll make sure that we keyframe this value, and then we'll go back. So now it looks like it's rolling in the right direction, right? And then since it does the spin, we need to spin this object as well, so to the opposite direction. So we'll make sure that we store the value 0 here at the rotation H, and then we move to frame 53, and then I'll do a full spin to 180. I'll store that value, and then we can take a look at this. So let's check if this is in the right direction, and let's tweak some tangents as well. So I'll hop into the rotation H and B, frame them up, and we'll go ahead and change the length of these tangents altogether. So something like that. And I think this feels a bit off. So let's try and expand this tangent on the spin keyframes, because I believe that if it spins a bit sooner, it won't feel as if it's sliding as much as it is right now. So I reckon that feels a bit better. And then also let's see if we can reduce the speed on this twist as well. I'm just going to go into the rotation P of our level 1 and 2, which is basically just this entire spin of this top level, and see if we can make this feel a bit less fast. Maybe a bit more. Yeah, that feels a lot nicer, I think. And then let's also maybe have the roller move out a bit further on the x-axis. So I'll frame that up. And then maybe let's have it go to like, oh yeah, that's way too far. Maybe something, I'm just gonna watch this in the perspective view. It would be nice if as if it almost like rolled on the edge here. So something like that. Yeah, nice. Let's view this in the perspective view. Yeah, that felt a lot better, I think. Great. Really cool. Let's see how this looks with a different model. I'm just going to switch shift to the torus. Yeah, nice. This is super cool that we can like change objects right like in the middle of animation, I think. Makes for a really cool process, I reckon. But yeah, I'll stick with the cylinder in this case. So this looks great, but we can make it look even more interesting, I think. So let's begin offsetting some of these things. So we need to kind of be careful of which objects we offset from one another. So for example, this flower expand position, it needs to be following the same timing as the extrude offset, for example. So if we were to, for example, move these just a few frames ahead, this won't follow with the expansion of the extrude. So that's just a few things to be mindful of. So to make this easier in terms of offsetting, we can actually go ahead and just structure the objects in the timeline here in the order that they'll be animated in. So the bottom level is the first kind of piece that would be moving, I think. So I'll place that at the top. And then the extrude, rectangle, and flower move together. Obviously, this one also needs to move with the extrude. So I'll place this one there and the flower rotation there. And this level 1, 2, 3 position is the counter movement for the torus shrinking. So I'll place them together as well. So just like that. And the position set for the level 1 and 2, that was also to counteract the shrinking of the torus. So I'll make sure that that is right beneath the level 1, 2, 3. And the middle null here can be placed together with the torus, I think, so it spins as it shrinks. And the top roller is at the bottom, since that's the last object that will be kind of moving. So with this in place, this makes things a lot easier for us. So we can take the extrude, the flower expand position, the flower rotation, and the rectangle. I'll hit Control A and S to frame them up, and then we can just move them maybe 3 frames ahead. So 1, 2, 3. So now this pipe kind of spins, and then after that the flower starts to rotate. We'll also offset these things a bit further, but for now we're just going to focus on these. And I think it would be cool if the rectangles kind of shrink before the expansion happens, so it kind of has this squash and stretch feeling, so it kind of shrinks in and then it expands up. I think that looks really cool. Great. Juju. Nice. And then I think we can take the torus, the middle null here, and then the level 1, 2, 3 position, and only the position set for the level 1 and 2. We'll hit Control A and S to frame them all up, and we can probably move them like 5 or 6 frames ahead, I think. So something like that. Maybe even more. Let's try that. Maybe let's try and put it at 7. Yeah, that looks really cool, I think. Let's also just kind of view this from our front view, just so we can make sure that we are maintaining contact for these objects at the entire time, which we are, so that's perfect. And then as you can tell, the tilting and rotation of this top level here, we haven't offset any of those, so they are happening immediately, which they could. I mean, it looks really good, but I think we can offset them just a few frames. So I'll just select the rotation P, rotation B, the top roller here, Control A and S, and then I'll just move them out maybe to frame. Let's try 8 at first. No, that's a bit too late. I'm gonna try maybe frame 3. Yeah, I think that works. However, I do think that we can shift the torus movements just a bit sooner, so it happens a bit earlier. So I'll select the torus, the middle, the level 1, 2, 3, and the position set here. I'll hit Control A, and I believe they are on frame 9 now. Let's maybe try 6. That gets a bit wonky, I think. Maybe let's try... Which frame is that? 6. Yeah, I think 6 works really well. I'm just going to view this from the front view. Just double check. Yeah. Really nice. So yeah, I think this looks a lot more dynamic than it did from the beginning. Obviously, as you can tell, the curves and the keyframes and stuff, they're not too complicated. It's just a matter of how we structure things that can open up doors in terms of how You can offset certain types of movements with ease and just be a bit clever in terms of how you parent objects. I think that's the important lesson here. So now we obviously want this to loop, right? So we have this animation, it ends here, but obviously we want this to go back to the starting position too, right? So now that we have all these parameters animated, this is super simple. So as previously, we'll do this chronologically. So we'll start with the bottom pipe here. So maybe at like, let's see where animation ends. It ends at like, yeah. So maybe at frame, we don't want it to stay still for too long. So maybe at like frame 60, we can start animating back certain attributes. So for this bottom level here, I mean, this still loops since it only spins like 180 degrees. So we don't necessarily need to change this, but I mean, it's nice to have some movements, right? So we'll just go ahead and hit control here in the timeline. So we set a keyframe here for the current value, and then we'll hop to frame 88. And we can go ahead and set another keyframe, and I'll just spin this. I'll keep spinning it in the same direction so we don't copy this value, but we end up with a 360 movement. So we're still going to end up at the same position. It's just that we keep spinning. So I'll just make sure that these keyframes are set to ECs, and then we'll tweak the tangents later. And we'll do the same thing with the extrude here. So we'll set a keyframe. I'll hit Control A and S just to frame them up, and we'll go to frame 88 because we want some of these things to be in sync. In this case, we'll just copy and paste this keyframe. We'll select both of them and turn them into ECs, just like that. Same thing here. We'll go to frame 60. We'll select the flower expand here. We'll set a keyframe. So we store this value. We'll go to frame 88 and we'll copy and paste this initial keyframe. We'll select both of them and turn them into EC so we have the tangents available. And for the flower spinning here, I think we can do the same thing as we did for the pipe. I think we can just keep spinning it for another 180. So at frame 60, I'll just control click here, add a keyframe, go to frame 88. We'll set a keyframe, control click, make sure that it's on frame 88, and then we'll set it to minus 360, just like that. And we'll turn them into ECs, and then we just need to do this for the rectangles also. So I'll just copy and paste the previous keyframe. I'll go to frame 88 and copy and paste the beginning ones, just like that. Great. Now we can just watch this movement. Really boring, but we'll make it more interesting, I promise. So we can go ahead and adjust the tangents for all of these objects here. So I'll just select all of the ones that I just animated, hit Control A and S, and then we can just kind of adjust these parameters here. So we'll have some easing in quite a bit, just like that. And then for the ease out, we'll have some even more extreme easing out. So something like this. We'll try it out. Nice. Maybe even more, maybe less, like minus 30 frames. Great. Just making sure it loops, we can just skip back and forth like this. Shift F and Shift G. Great. Now, like the beginning, I kind of enjoyed how the rectangles were offset in terms of the animation for the flower here. So I'll just offset them like a couple of frames, see what that does. Yeah, that's really nice. Zoom, zoom. Super cool. And now we should just do the same with the rest of the objects. So for the torus, we can actually have the starting frame of these animations to be a bit sooner. So we offset them straight away. So I'll have this start at frame 65 and I'll just copy the previous keyframes, paste them. So we have that value stored. I'll zoom in a bit here and then we'll go to frame 95. I think we actually need to expand this preview range here. So I'll set this to 124 just so we have some more frames to work with here. And I'll copy and paste the radius here for the torus, just like that. Now we obviously need to adjust the positions here, but we'll do the spinning rotation first. So it was frame 65, right? Yeah, to start on. So we'll do the same thing here for the middle rotation. I'll copy and paste this keyframe, go to frame 95, and then like with the other spinning objects, we'll just keep spinning. So we spin to minus 360 instead of going back. And I'll convert these to ECs so we have the tangents flat and available here. And I'll go to frame 65 again, go to our level 1, 2, 3 position, copy and paste that keyframe. And I'll go to frame 95 once again, copy and paste that. And then we'll do the exact same thing for the level 1 and 2. And we only need to do this for the position now, because I don't think we need to do any more tilting and spinning stuff here. So we'll just copy and paste the position said, 65 and then 95, I believe it was, right? Copy and paste the beginning keyframe. So now we are at the same exact spot as we started on. Great. Now these timings aren't really tweaked, so things look a bit slow and weird. So let's adjust that. So for all of the parameters that we just animated, we'll have the position set track selected here. Then we'll just select the level 1, 2, 3, middle, and the torus, just like that. Control A and S to frame them all up. And then since a lot of these tangents have different lengths here, to set them to the same length, we can just go ahead and tweak the right or the left time here. So now all of them are on the same values, which is what we need, because some of these movements needs to be in sync. So we'll do a similar type of ease in and ease out as the other objects here for the loop. So I'll tweak this to about like minus 30 frames, just like that. Yeah, that looks great. Let's even try and shift these outwards just a bit, so we delay them even further. So let's see if we can get some cooler dynamic results here. So it feels a bit slow, I think, so I'll just pull this back into frame 65. Maybe shorten the duration of the animation so they end up on frame 92 instead. That's a bit too quick, maybe. Yeah, that feels really nice, I think. So now they are starting on frame 65 and ending up on frame 94. So just one frame less than we initially had. So this is starting to look really, really good, I think. Now, I want one last kind of movement going on here before we wrap up. And it would be kind of cool if this top roller almost like lingered in the air once this shrinks, because it goes down so quickly, so it maybe like hang in the air for a bit. So I think we can achieve some fun results by doing that. So we'll come into the coordinates for our top roller here, and I'll just check that it's the position Y we're going to animate, correct. So maybe at like frame 67 or 66, we'll place that first keyframe. Once it's kind of reached its like maximum velocity, that's where the like apex of this movement would be. So maybe somewhere around here. I'll place a keyframe there at frame 71. So just like that. It looks a bit weird now, but that's because our tangents aren't the best here. So I'll just hit Control A and S to frame it up. And I think we need a much more of an easing motion here. So just like that. And then we'll shrink this one down. So let's fill this one out. Yeah, I think that could work. And then once the movement stops here, we can kind of have the roller drop back down. So I'll copy and paste this impact keyframe here, and we can just play this out. Feels a bit strange, but I think that's because we had such a long tangent on this one. So obviously we want this to be a drop. So the impact would be having a short tangent, and then maybe we can extend this one. So I'll just hold Shift and Command to extend just this side. So just like that. Great. Now, one thing to look out for here is that since we are doing a counter movement, we don't want this to move up beyond its original position. And it kind of does that at this point, right? So we need a longer ease in here, just like that. And then it kind of goes up a bit too far. So we'll just shrink down this apex here. I think that's a lot better. Yeah, that's great. And then obviously we need some bounces, right? So we just dropped this roller, so it needs to bounce a couple of times. So I'll go ahead and control click here in the timeline, just move the keyframe up a bit here at frame 77. I'll turn this into an easy ease so we have tangents visible. So I just pull this out a bit. Move on to frame 79, copy and paste this impact keyframe just like that. We can take a look at that. Great. Then three frames ahead at frame 82, we'll copy and paste the apex keyframe, shrink it down a bit. Go 2 frames ahead, copy and paste the impact keyframe here. Perfect. And we'll just watch this back. Great. Let's try and like increase the apex point on this one. See how that feels. Nice. Let's try even more. Yeah, that looks really fun. Maybe a bit too tall, but yeah, that's good. And we obviously need a tiny little bounce here at the end. So That's what I'll do. 2 frames ahead, I'll copy and paste this apex keyframe, shrink down the tangents just a bit. And then 1 frame ahead, I'll copy and paste the impact keyframe, and we'll watch this. Great. This is looking really good. I'm super happy with this. Maybe that first bounce is a bit too tall, actually. I got a bit carried away there. Great. I'm just going to watch it again in its full glory. Lovely. And yeah, if you want to tweak some objects right now, feel free to do so. You can get some very different results just by tweaking the colors and the models here, I think. So yeah, feel free to take a stab at that. I'd say we have a really cool animation here. So yeah, if you want to render this one out, as always, hop on to the render section at the end of the course, past all of the workshops, and I'll just show you how to switch around the lighting, change the different cameras and aspect ratios, and then just render it out. And yeah, hope you're happy with the animation. We have some really fun workshops to get through. So yeah, I'll see you in the next ones.